So, hi BookTube, welcome to the first Friday reads of 2020. So 2 books completed. Bed-Stuy Is Burning, Brian Platzer, it's his debut novel, and The Order of the Day by French writer Eric Vuillard. And very quickly, the 2 books I'm currently reading, which I won't be talking about in any detail. Dennis Johnson's Angels, which I think was his debut. I like to read at least one Dennis Johnson a year. And Tim O'Brien in The Lake of the Woods, which is a buddy read with both Jason and Kelly, husband and wife. Kelly of Books I'm Not Reading and Jason of Old Blues Chapter and Verse. About a third of the way through this, and all I'll say is this is fantastic. Anyway, that's pretty much all I'm going to say about those, although that might come back in reference to one of the other 2. Okay. So, Bed-Stuy Is Burning. So I saw last year Matthew Sciarappa's review of Platzer's follow-up novel and talking about how it was a very, very good political novel. Now, I'm always on the lookout for political novels. Unfortunately, most of them seem to get written by Americans rather than Brits, but you know, that's another story. But I thought I would start with this, and then if I liked it, I would move on to the second novel. It just seemed more logical to me. I don't know why I felt that, but I did. They're both political novels. Having read this, I am not going to read his follow-up book. The problem with political novels is that it's very easy to fall into one of 2 traps. One is you say it's a political novel, but actually the politics is just background to what is otherwise a bog standard novel about the central characters and their relationships, etc., etc. The other pole is that the characters are cardboard cutouts because they're just mouthpieces for the author to, you know, trot out the political arguments that he or she wants to trot out. And everyone has a position, and somehow that forms a debate. But it's just poor storytelling and poor fiction. Now, to be fair to this, it doesn't fall into one of those traps. It finds a new way to be bad, and I'll come to that. And I'm just going to say that I have a pair of Tinker Bells here, which I will be picking up and striking if my passions get too irate about this book. So you might have to bear with me on that. Anyway, so I don't disagree with the politics. Not the politics of this book that annoyed me. So the politics seem to be fairly, you know, spot on. It's a book about the gentrification of New York and the sort of racial component of that. That basically the area of Bedford-Stuyvesant, or Bed-Stuy for short, is one of the last areas in New York to become gentrified. It was a community largely of Afro-Americans, and it only became gentrified when they had done such a good job with their community that, it, you know, to outside eyes, it became an appealing place to move into, where the property prices were still affordable for, you know, for the last vestige of these wonderful Victorian brownstones and older possibly. And as the whites start to move in, suddenly you see the police moving, you know, coming to the area in a way they'd never come to provide any kind of security and protection when it was a largely Afro-American community. But because the crime level, the petty crime level is as it always was, now that you have whites living in the area, the police feel that they need to protect and secure the properties and the livelihoods of the white people. So that's the basic argument of the book, and there's, you know, I have no argument against that. It seems very, you know, spot on. The characters chosen to illustrate this. So we have Aaron, who is a disgraced rabbi who was defrocked because he basically stole funds, community funds, to gamble. He's a gambling addict, although that is the manifestation of what his actual sickness is, which is a sort of an appetite for taking risks. And once he's been kicked out of the rabbinate, he goes into Wall Street and he makes a very tidy living as a financier. He has a long-term partner, girlfriend, called Amelia, and they have a very young child together. And they've moved into this brownstone in Bed-Stuy, in the nicest part of Bed-Stuy, where you still have the original sort of features of the brownstone houses. and they let out one floor of their house and they let it out to another white couple. Amelia is a journalist, but she's a sort of, she does sort of kind of tacky stories about the lifestyles of the rich and famous and Hollywood stars, and she has ambitions to write serious stuff. And her first sort of serious piece is reproduced in here, where she's written a kind of a profile of the neighbourhood of Bed-Stuy, and it really is a case of race explaining. It's like the white person telling Afro-Americans all about the lives that they live, and it is fairly, apart from patronising, it made my blood boil just reading that, and that's quite early on in here. She's not a great journalist, or if she can write, which I'm not sure she can, but if she, even if she can write, she doesn't have any kind of sort of political sensibilities and sensitivities at all. It's all about her and her career. And there's another character who lives in the house other than their young child, and that is Antoinette, who is their nanny, who does 5 days a week, weekdays, looking after their young child. And she has a child of her own called Teddy back home, but he's old enough now to go to early day school. And Antoinette is transitioning from Catholic to Muslim, and she wears a hijab. But she's doing it kind of on her own. She's not really seeking sort of guidance or being mentored and tutored in this. She's kind of making it up as she goes along. Such is her desperate need for some sort of religious base identity. But she's a good nanny. There's no getting away from that. Okay, so those are the characters. And the backdrop that all this is set against, because the bulk of the novel takes place over one day, is that the police commissioner has increased stop and search, as we call it here in the UK, which is always sort of racially biased, and the logic of that is if you have to stop the small petty crimes to cut off the more serious crimes committed by people, as they sort of otherwise if you didn't arrest them for the petty crimes, you didn't stamp out the petty crimes, they'd feel emboldened and go on to create more serious crimes. And the police commissioner has, 2 or 3 little scenes here, although they're completely redundant. But anyway, and in the course of this sort of stop and search campaign, a 12-year-old boy is stopped and shot 12 times and dies. They thought he was armed and he was big for his age and all this kind of stuff. So the community is seething, and it does break out into a riot. And for slightly improbable reasons, which I don't need to go into, one part of the riot becomes centred on the house of Amelia and Aaron. That they are seen as, sort of whites, not, as I say, not only sort of, making a living by sort of exploiting Bed-Stuy's property prices, but, the one floor they rent out is not even to an Afro-American couple, it's to another white couple. It's a bit thin, but we'll pass on that because that is not the problem with this book. The problem with this book is the characters have very strange reactions to the events unfolding. So the first thing to say is that violence is very quick, it's very fleeting. So you don't really have the time to sort of write about violence and its aftermath, immediate aftermath. You don't have the word space. It's not realistic. So, for example, a character is killed, a bystander character is killed in this house, and this character is in the house because he basically is trying to make a move on Antoinette, trying to hook up with her. And the way it's written is she doesn't even have any interest in that because she's got her own, her own spiritual journey, whatever that makes. And he is shot and killed. And the immediate aftermath of that is it is shocking to to ordinary people in this house, in this domestic environment, who see someone shot. Of course that and that's fine. But very quickly we get Antoinette hugging his body, cupping his body. Oh, you were going to, you've been wrenched away from me. You were going to be my future partner. You were going to help me sort of on the journey for the rest of my life. Which we had no inkling of that. It was all coming from the bloke. And B, I don't think that's how you'd react. Even if I believe that she had real feelings for this man, that's not how you'd react. You'd be just shocked. You'd be on shutdown. But no, she has this, she breaks out of sort of terror you know, the situation that caused that is still going on in the house or just outside the house. So you really should be sort of snapped back, either total paralysis is shut down as your emotions can't cope with it, or you're back in the moment. The danger is still present. But no, it's like all this stuff, and she's hugging and cradling this guy who she seemed to have a remote relationship with anyway. So she has a very strange reaction. When this guy is shot, when the bullet breaks out, she goes on some kind of nutty spiritual religious mumbo jumbo, and I say it's mumbo jumbo because it's not recognisably Catholic and it's not recognisably Muslim. It's like, again, she's made it up, and she comes up with this sort of, you know, theological response to sort of help, you know, protect us now at the end of our day, but it's her version of it. It's absolutely nutty. Aaron also resorts to a sort of a religious, you know, he is not in the house when all these events happen. He dashes back to protect his family. And he you know, there's this mob outside his house, and he sort of clicks back into rabbi mode and starts giving a sermon. What? You know, it's utterly potty. And, you know, somehow that sort of, you know, salves the raging mob, even though they point out, well, yeah, you're Jewish, you know, what relevance has that got to us? And of course, all the associations of Jewish landlords and sort of Jewish Wall Street and all of this. Yet somehow his sermon, you know, soothes them. Utterly bizarre. And then Amelia, you know, she sort of snaps back into journalist mode in the most offensive way, and it comes back to, you know, that article she wrote about the neighbourhood. I'm not going to spoil the actual sort of setup of the plot in which she sort of snaps back into journalist mode, but you realise that the anger at sort of whites moving in on a pre-established Afro-American community is absolutely justified, because, you know, these people are just in it for themselves, for their careers, and it's a convenient thing for them to be able to afford to get on the property ladder at a lower rate than they would if they were trying to buy in Manhattan. They are so offensive, really. So offensive, Aaron and Amelia. And I don't know if Platzer is just dumb, or if he's consciously being offensive. You know, has he got his politics so badly wrong, or is he trying to show us how out of touch and insensitive these white people are? In which case, because they get so much of the book, it just becomes offensive. Or maybe he's just dumbly offensive. I don't know what the answer to that is. The politics really rankled with me. And there was one good bit in the whole book, which is there's basically a Afro-American street kid who has a central role in this sort of domestic riot thing. And she comes into possession of a large cheque made out to her. She hasn't stolen it; it's made out to her. And then we follow her as she tries to bank it. Of course, she has no bank account. She has no ID to cash it for green in hand. And even if she did, it's not made out from a corporation or an employer. It's a private cheque, so it couldn't be done that way. You couldn't get it with ID anyway. And I thought that was really telling. I thought that was really insightful about there's a whole sort of, you know, cohort of people in society, both in America and Britain, and I'm sure in other developed societies, who are completely below the financial way of doing business. You know, having a bank account, having a credit card, having ID, and all of this. She has none of that because she's never had a need to, and that was really well done. But unfortunately, this cheque becomes a big plot point late, you know, after she's failed to cash it. But it's a plot point not just in terms of plot, but again on terms of people's motives, in terms of Amelia and in terms of Aaron. It's no longer about, you know, this street kid and the money that she has need of. It's about what role giving that money away plays between Aaron and Amelia. You know, don't forget, Aaron is a compulsive gambler. He's addicted to gambling, and a lot of this book is Amelia and Aaron trying to decide whether they love each other and what that means, because Amelia has been married before and it failed. She actually walked out on her husband to go with Aaron and was having an affair with him before her marriage ended. And she believes that there's no such thing as a perfect man, therefore what's the point of marriage, because it's always going to be flawed. So That's her view of marriage. And Aaron, as a you know, someone battling his demons, is, can I commit to someone else? Can I overcome my weaknesses? Can I demonstrate true love for them by you know, overcoming my own weaknesses, which pull me away to sort of selfishness and selfish activity? And as I say, the check for the money becomes you know, symbolically central to this push and pull of these two characters in their relationship, because, you know, he's an addict. He was going to give $50,000 away to a community charity, because otherwise he'd gamble it. And his wife has made that calculation. Well, that's not really proof to me of your true love. It's like you're removing the means of your addiction, but that doesn't prove that you can conquer your addiction and pledge your full love for me. But it's not actually Aaron who, in the end, gives the money to the street kid. As I say, it's almost as bizarre as all this sort of, you know, Antoinette's strange spiritual sermon and Aaron addressing a raging mob with a Jewish sermon, you know. And in the end, Platzer fails to convince either that Amelia and Aaron would overcome their character flaws and be together in a strong marriage, or that they've got no chance and it's going to fail, because all he ends up doing at repeated stages is just, they each assert, I love you too, because he hasn't done it through the writing, through the dialogue exchange of leaving the reader knowing, yes, I believe you when you say I love you, or no, I don't believe you when you say I love you. It's just like he has to keep asserting it. And interestingly, in this, Tim O'Brien in The Lake of the Woods, there's a husband and wife at the centre of it, or at least in the 76 pages I've read, and they are also involved in politics. But their declarations of love are absolutely backed up by what else is being described, what other dialogue exchanges are going on. And it's just so much more substantial and profound than the treatment here. And this is I suppose where it does fall in between, it does fall foul of the shortcomings, because essentially this is a book about a married couple, and yes, they are placed in a political situation, which is not bolt-on, is not background, to be fair, but the characters are unconvincing. They're not cardboard cutouts. In fact, what I would say they were also almost by the numbers, that they were put together as some sort of psychological profile that would suit the author's purposes. So Aaron is a defrocked rabbi with a gambling habit. It just didn't read convincing to me. As I say, it just felt it's all sort of put together in order to best, illustrate whatever he wanted to illustrate. And I think it failed on all of those fronts, I have to say. So this book annoyed me. It didn't work as a piece of fiction, as a piece of storytelling. It didn't work on its political agenda. And in fact, it was just sort of quite offensive, and you felt for the raging rioters, which maybe you were supposed to, but then they weren't really the centre of the book. The centre were Amelia and Aaron. And, by their actions, they are complicit somehow in provoking a riot. I mean, they didn't provoke the riot. Shooting this kid 12 times, that's what started the riot. Aaron and Amelia are swept up in it and become figureheads and symbols of something to attack. But it just didn't work. It was, as I say, offensively annoying. And I think I managed to get through without ranting, but I'm just going to do... and calm. Okay. And this also was a book of politics. Before I go and talk about it, just to say that just before Christmas, I thought I'd treat myself to a Christmas present. And a bookshop in London, which is not terribly close to me, called the Big Green Bookshop, they offer a subscription package where either 3 months, 6 months, or a year, you pay your money up front, and they will send you a book, and they ask you what your type, your preferred type of read is. You fill in a questionnaire. And they will send you a book, a month, according to 3 months, 6 months, or a year. And I've gone for the year's package. And this is the first book they sent me. I hadn't heard of it. And obviously you don't know what you're going to get, so it's a nice surprise. And I did it I thought it nice to get a sort of surprise book that's sort of not necessarily on my radar. As I say, I hadn't heard of this. So when it came in the post, I thought, excellent. Here's something I never would have found out about. So thank you to the Big Green Bookshop, and I look forward to seeing what February brings. So this is a book that considers the run-up in the 30s to the Second World War, and there are separate chapters on the sort of various failures of the German industrialists and people, the Austrian Chancellor and the Austrian people, the British government, the French government, to basically stop the Nazis. Now, I'm not sure whether the Nazis could have been stopped from plunging us all into a world war, but this book, I think, very effectively shows missed opportunities, instances of cowardice, of self-delusion, of self-interest. And I think it portrays all that very well. The problem I had with it is I know quite a lot about, my degree is in history. I know quite a lot about this period, and I'm not sure that it was telling me much I didn't already know. I think if you're not familiar with it, I think this book is superb, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. It's not long, so it covers the run up to war and the sort of the conflicts, diplomatic conflicts and meetings that happened. I think you would get a lot out of this in quite a short, concise way. And that's not to say that this is dry. There's some really good writing here. But the problem I had with it is, because it's such a short book, the brilliant writing which brings to life and dramatises the events that we read about in a dry way happened in history books. But there's not much of it, or there's not enough of it, because it's almost fragmentary. The style isn't fragmentary, it's not like sort of postmodernist at all, although there is a bit of sort of metafiction or sort of comments by the author, and I'll come back to that. So it's quite a straightforward read, but I'll give you an example of this is page 1, so it won't be a spoiler. The sun. This is the first line. The sun is a cold star, its heart spines of ice, its light unforgiving. In February the trees are dead, the river petrified, as if the springs had stopped spewing water and the sea could swallow no more. Time stands still. And then it's about the city of, I can't remember which German city it was. Let's say it's Munich. I think it is Munich. So while the people are sort of on their way to work, this sort of, a portentous meeting is happening. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. And even though the 20th of February 1933 was not just any other day, most people spent the morning grinding away, immersed in the great, decent fallacy of work, with its small gestures that enfold a silent, conventional truth and reduce the entire epic of our lives to a diligent pantomime. So I think that's brilliant writing. It's like grinding away, immersed in the great, decent fallacy of work. I mean, I think that's beautiful. I mean, to me, that sums up work, being a wage slave and all that kind of stuff. And while all these sort of, worker drones were going about their business in Munich, in the Reichstag, where a meeting was happening with Goering and Hitler and the top German industrialists, because there was about to be another election or a plebiscite, and the Nazis were the largest party, but they weren't a majority. In fact, they were never a majority. And Hitler and Goering are saying to the industrialists, we will bring stability and order, we will protect you from communism, but we have no money to fight a campaign. You need to give us money. And basically, they convinced the German industrialists to give them money, and the rest, as they say, unfortunately, is history. Now, that really happened, and, the start of it, how it's framed, against the background of ordinary people going about their jobs, not knowing any of this sort of stuff happening at a higher level, is brilliant. But then when we come to the description of the meeting, it's really sort of, there is no superlative writing to take the breath away like there was in that first page. And that happens time and time again. The best chapter in this is something, I don't know if it's true, it's a piece of sociology rather than history, so I wouldn't have known it from my history degree, where it describes the costume department of one of the Hollywood studios in 1933 that already has Nazi uniforms as part of its costume department, and that costume department is overseen and run by a German refugee, German Jewish refugee, who obviously has the horrendous, although whether anyone quite knew it in 1933 we don't know, but it was enough to make him flee Germany. The sort of jackboots that he has to handle as part of the inventory of this. You know, that was brilliant. That was brilliant. But the other scenes of Hitler versus the Austrian Chancellor, sort of, you know, bullying him so that he just let the Germans walk in, the failures of the British and the French, they were unremarkable to me and added no new knowledge. As I say, if you're not that familiar with the detail of this period, this book nails it. But for me, I didn't get that much from it. And I say it's metafictional, or postmodern at least. Every now and again, the author will throw in a line that sort of clearly comes from us looking back, us in the 21st century looking back. And interestingly, he uses the term gaslighting, that somebody was gaslighting someone else, which you really only associate as a, you know, sort of an internet era term about sort of trolling and bullying. But actually, I went back and looked at it, and it was around of the era, but it was first used after the 1943 or 1944 film called Gaslight. That's where the term gaslighting comes from. So this book's set in 1933. It's an anachronism to use gaslighting. Now, is that the translator's mistake? I don't think so. I think the writer's done that deliberately, because I think there are elements of this book that look to Laurent Binet, another French author, his wonderful book HHHH, which is also about sort of history and the making of history in terms of academic history. And I think this book sort of looks towards that, or at least references what Binet was doing. But Binet's book is a proper sized novel. It's much more substantial and therefore much more successful in what it's trying to say about how we make history, how we write history, than this. So I actually think that was probably a mistake to say gaslighting. I will just say the translator, because I think it is a really good translation. The translator is from the French, is called Marc Polizotti, and does a good job. It reads really well with a sort of slight level of literariness to sort of take it above into the next order. But as I say, I didn't really know what to make of it. There were definitely things I liked. I liked that opening page. I liked the section set in the Hollywood costume department. But the rest of it, you know, I suppose one thing I didn't know was when the Germans walked into Austria, what was called the Anschluss, that von Ribbentrop, who was at the time the German ambassador to the UK, was dining with Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and their wives and some other dignitaries, because he was about to leave Britain to return to Germany to become the Nazis' foreign minister. And a note is passed to Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, during the meal. And clearly it's a note saying the Germans have just marched into Austria. But, you know, von Ribbentrop knew, and the Nazis knew, that Chamberlain was too much of a sort of etiquette guy to break up the party, no matter what. So Van Ribbentrop is just talking these sort of meaningless anecdotes to keep Chamberlain at the table from stopping Chamberlain breaking the party up. And that was quite interesting. But where you've got a set two, say, between Hitler and the Austrian Chancellor, which is played fairly straight, and yes, we get the imagining of the character of the Chancellor, you know, so that we sort of get the human scale of this. But it's less satisfying, and indeed, again, you wonder sort of, this is obviously well researched, incredibly well researched, and you know, there's use of analysis of newsreel of the time, but clearly that was propaganda because most of it was put out by Goebbels. There's the authors obviously read the memoirs of people like this Austrian Chancellor and stuff. So that's why I say, to me, I didn't really learn much because I was aware of all that through the history, and I didn't feel the literature of this embellished and spun that out into more interesting detail on a fictional level. I'm not asking it to be, you know, giving us greater detail from a non-fiction level. I'm just talking in terms of the imagination. I didn't feel it dramatised and gave us an imaginative view that expanded this terribly much. So just to sum up, you know, that is 2 stars. This was the first book I read this year. I mean, what a dreadful start to the year I had. Last year I read Dennis Johnson's Stars at Noon, which, while wasn't a 5-star book, was a good way to start the year. This I give 4 because it is a really good book. It just didn't do a whole hell of a lot for me, but I would recommend it to people who are interested in the period but perhaps don't, you know, haven't studied it And it's a short read, it's 125 pages. I think you would get a lot out of it. Okay, so that's this week's Friday Reads. Till next time, thanks very much.